After hearing so many of Stan's stories, it was time for me to find out what shadows were lurking in my unconscious. Would they be as dark as what Stan had seen? And if so, would I have the courage to confront them? Rule number 1, never do this alone. The sitter is there to keep you safe, ground you, and more importantly, to hold the space so that you can completely open to whatever comes. As the LSD took effect, there was a flood of geometric imagery. Some people call it retinal discharge, but now I think I was seeing fractals, or even the dimension that holds the blueprints of the physical world. Soon it transitioned into Christina, and then, as though I was seeing through Christina's eyes, it was Stan. There was a sadness as she realized that she was leaving him. But then Stan transitioned into my father, and Christina dissolved into me. The pain was so intense that I knew it couldn't just be mine. I actually felt as though I was choking. In that moment, I understood that although I might have been triggered by the pending death of my father, I was also tapping into the collective sadness. And what a depth of it there was. Addiction, drugs, alcohol, sex, compulsive behavior, anything to dissolve back into the formless ocean of love and avoid this unbearable sadness of separation. It took me 2 days to feel whole again. If it hadn't been for my kids to think about, or the sitter to talk to, I don't know if I would have come out of it. But because I had grieved my dad's death before he died, I was able to listen to his daydreams during those last weeks of his life. And when he finally slipped into a coma, I knew how to help him detach from his body so he wasn't afraid or in pain. He lay like that for 28 hours, and then an hour before my daughter's last ballet performance, he died. I was filming while Charlotte danced when suddenly I remembered that he had sat in that theater. And I remembered exactly where he had sat. The memory was so clear that I realized that I was seeing through his eyes. His spirit was there in the theater to watch his granddaughter dance. After the performance, I went to help my mom. When I had finally cleaned the space so that she could remember him in better health, I went home. A few hours later, I let the tears well up and felt myself once again pulled out by my heart. But because I knew that I could survive it, I allowed the sadness to flow, and it felt amazing. If I hadn't witnessed Stan's courage and trusted his example, I doubt any of that would have happened. He wasn't afraid to confront the darkness. In 1967, Stan was invited to continue his research at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland, but pushback against psychedelics was growing, inflamed by flawed studies engineered to generate fear.
We have children that are born without legs or arms, the kind of thing we've seen after thalidomide exposure.
Even though the studies were eventually dismissed, the culture was reeling from the impact of psychedelics. As a result, the research program at Johns Hopkins University was terminated. Fortunately for Stan, the program at Spring Grove Psychiatric Hospital was still operational. While there, he continued his research, encountering even more intriguing patients.
This was a patient who had some of the most difficult pathology, if you want to call it that way, that I've ever seen. She was 4 years in prison, and while on parole, she became a multiple drug addict. She had very difficult episodes of depression, So it was a kind of a life decision, and so we decided to take our chances. So she had 2 very powerful sessions. She was from a family where there was alcoholism, there was abuse, there was incest. And then in the 3rd session, suddenly she started crying, she started screaming, and then vicious expression in her eyes. Incredibly sort of evil expression. And this very deep voice came and introduced himself as the devil. And then came this barrage of insults and threats. There was information that the patient as such could not have known. I had a wonderful nurse that was Southern Baptist, and she was shaking. I thought she was getting a heart attack. So I was watching the patient and the nurse. At one point, they said, well, this is obviously the Jungian archetype that's manifesting here, but maybe for that kind of archetype, the crucifix would be the best remedy. As I was reacting emotionally, it was just becoming more real. So I started meditating on light. I knew that, from my spiritual reading, that these creatures don't like light. Suddenly, it stopped the way it started, sort of everything relaxed. And then as she was coming down, we sort of started talking about it. And I realized she remembered only what happened before this episode and what happened after. There's just total amnesia for this. And I wondered if I should sort of bring that up and talk about it, and they decided just not to do it at all. But she herself felt wonderful. And then very shortly afterwards, she left the hospital, and probably with a little lying on the questionnaire, she got a job as a taxi driver.
But despite the tremendous success of his work, the program lost funding.
We were finding it more and more difficult to continue the research, and I had a lot of material, so I really wanted a sabbatical and do some writing, and I got invitations from several publishers, so I could take a year off, and I went to a party in New York City, and there was Michael Murphy there, and the co-founder of Esalen.
When I met Stan, first in '65, he was probably the best looking man in the human potential movement. I mean, he was as good looking as Richard Burton.
He said, so Stan, what are you doing these days? I said, well, I'm actually taking a year off to write a book. And he said, why don't you come to Esalen?
It was my instinct as a director and producer of this ongoing theater at Esalen. He was perfect. And of course, we had been right in the middle of a lot of experimentation with psychedelics. And although psychedelics were not my ally, Stan represented not only another doorway into this, but also sobriety. I mean, he actually thought about it. Tim pretended to think about it, but he just proclaimed a vision of taking LSD every Sunday. If it's good, just have more of it. And we saw disaster after disaster during the 60s. So Bob Schwartz gave us some money, and Esalen provided a beautiful house, and off we went. And he became the leading force in our overall programming for most of the years he was there.
Besides our breathwork workshops, we offered then month-long workshops. People were coming to Esalen from all over the world, and they didn't want to take just one workshop. So this gave me a chance to choose a topic I was interested in and see who in the world was doing some cutting-edge research and invite those people, and then always finding like 36 people who would want to do it with us.
One popular program combined Vipassana with breathwork.
I think of a time when we were holding our large holotropic breathwork and Buddhist practice retreats, and there's a room full of some hundreds of people doing the breath work after we had meditated, going through these profound openings with this music playing. Some people are in heavenly states, and some people feel like they're dying and getting reborn, and some people have past life experiences are turning into birds or animals, and some people are having the reliving of their childhood. Every possible thing. It's like being in Dante's Inferno and Purgatorio and Paradiso all at the same time. And it's really quite marvelous because it's so well held and tended by the facilitators. And then when things get really dicey, they call Stan over. So I remember one who was a multiple personality, who had different alters that would show themselves at different points. And one of them was really demonic. And this whole demonic side started to come out. Like, if you come near me, I will slash and kill you. So the facilitators were a little bit nervous because the voice and the aggression of this demon, you try to fix or help me and I will get you and I will kill you and slash you. It was not an easy person to be tending. So they called Stan over because it seemed like this demon wanted to eat everybody. And Stan came over very calm and cool and sat down and said, tell me more. You know, you're a demon. You have some powers. What are those powers you have? And who do you think you really are as a demon? I mean, do you really know what your identity is? He didn't quite ask it in that way, but he began to look directly at the demon and say, you don't know really where you come from, do you, who you are? I'm very pleased to meet you, but you don't. And the demon started to get confused and start to look around. And it was like, instead of being afraid of the demon, Stan met this demonic energy with a kind of curiosity and interest and fearlessness that the demon had never met before. And it started to kind of lose its way, and then the whole thing morphed. Magic happened when other people were frightened. That kind of innocence that Stan has. It's like this giant kid wandering around saying, wow, look at that. He has this tremendous appreciation for everything.
In 1974, Stan was about 43 years old, and I was about 24, working at Esalen as a night guard and then writing my dissertation, during the day. And we got a call at about 4:30 in the morning. The night guard who was on that night said, we've got a crisis and we need you guys here right away. 1 a.m. to 5:30 every morning, we would let in people from outside of Esalen to use the baths. A young man had taken LSD with his girlfriend and started to flip out at some point during the session, became violently paranoid. The girlfriend had escaped from the guy. He had gone up the hill to their van. All we knew was that he's got a knife, he's naked, he's psychotically paranoid and violent. As we're approaching the van, I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is great, just because I'm writing a dissertation on LSD psychotherapy. I'm now, in a life and death situation. So Stan opens the sliding van door, and the bottle is thrown right by his head. And then he goes in, picks up a blanket, wraps it around the man, and puts him in a bear hug that says, okay, you've taken a very powerful psychoactive drug. I want you to close your eyes and pay attention to what's going on inside you. Within about 15 minutes, the young man was laughing at himself, but at the same time embarrassed for what he had caused. It was a real testament to Stan's personal courage, but it also was an illustration of his whole philosophy of trusting the psyche. The very first lecture that I ever heard Stan give in March of 1974 at Esalen, I asked him at the end, what do you do in the case of someone who's in a really bad trip where they're descending into an incessant loop that they can't get out of and they feel like they're losing their sanity, and these things can have enduring effects, too. And he said with a kind of poetic conciseness that I've never forgotten, he just said, well, the full experience of an emotion is the funeral pyre of the emotion. And he just pointed out that we have a tendency to, of course, wall ourselves off from the pain, the scary things in our psyche that are trying to emerge. But he says that's actually the way out of the pathology of the suffering. So he was able to convey with that one sentence the idea that bad trips and negative material, which Tim Leary did not prepare the masses for, were actually a royal road to transformative healing.
I think it's essential when we discuss psychedelics now to talk about the challenging experiences and that it's not all easy. MAPS does psychedelic harm reduction at Burning Man and at festivals all over the world. And one of our main principles is difficult is not the same as bad. And I think that's where, with psychedelic therapy right now, we prepare people in a much different way and really talk about a lot of the kernels of wisdom will come wrapped in these very difficult experiences.